G'day, folks. It is AOS Coach here, and if you are tuning in, you must be one of the faithful. Apologies for my background. It has been flooding and raining, so I've been cleaning up and changing things around, and it looks kind of weird. This is the first time you guys have seen like what happens behind the scenes, but you're not here to listen to me to talk about blinds and backdrops. You are here to listen about all things Stormcast Eternals. And I am joined by Mathew Swinney, who was the winner of Adepticon 2022 with Stormcast, going 5-0 at 200 players. It's hard to know. I actually don't know how many players were at Adepticon. Could be 1 million for all I know. But Mathew did win with Stormcast. So I want to kind of get an understanding of how what he found from Stormcast. What was his list? And we'll talk list and faction rules and things like that. But also, like, what have we kind of learned over the last couple of months, given that we've got priority targets and, you know, we've got prime hunters and some of the Stormcast units. There's actually a lot of Stormcast units on that priority target list. So curious to hear if you swapped out your long strikes for adjudicators, have we dropped any of the dragons? What are you thinking? But before we get into that, I'll throw it over to my guest, Mathew. G'day, welcome, say hello to the internet.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me on, and I look forward to a fun conversation. There was 190 folks at Adepticon, by the way.
Look at 190 million, I think. You beat them all. You went 5-0. It's amazing how you kind of wrap that up. But how was Adepticon, like the actual event? Because I went in 2019. I was there. Great event. Really enjoyed the convention. It was cool to hang out with people outside of it. I know you're good friends with people like Anthony, Paul Castro, and you know the NashCon lads. But how was Adepticon for anyone who hasn't actually been or doesn't know much about the convention?
It was great. I mean, it's a really huge event. There's just a ton of people, and they have 40K. There was a ton of like X-Wing, Legion. You know, it was just massive tournaments, team tournaments, grand tournaments. It was a blast. You know, everybody is always really friendly, and the games are always really good. You know, plenty of tables, competition, plenty of great like vendors to look at and stroll through if you actually have the time. But no, it's kind of funny because I went, I think 5 years ago, and I've been trying to get back every year since. And obviously the last two got canceled because of COVID, and so I finally managed to get back. And then this was a great way to rein in another Adepticon trip.
Yeah, what I always love about Adepticon is not just the tournament, but also just all the things that you do afterwards. You hang out, you have some beers, people are just hanging out, playing games and going out to get meals, and you're just chatting with people. Because then often one of the experiences that I had that is very uncommon, at least for me as an Australian, is that when you go to a convention like Adepticon, and LVO might be the same. I haven't gone there just yet. You stay often at the convention, so people are hanging out, and they're not going to sit in their hotel room. They're not going back to their family and their friends. They're going to hang out with the lads and everyone who's around, and just chatting and hanging out with their friends, and all the guys and girls who are at the convention. It's just an awesome experience.
Yeah, I mean they have the Golden Demon competition up on the second floor, so that's great. You get to see all these just phenomenally painted miniatures, and they had like my buddy Jason and I that I went with, we went and played some board games. They have like a corner where you can like rent out all these various board games. You don't have to pay anything. So there's lots to do. It was a blast, and definitely be going back.
And by the way, the show is titled Old School because when I looked at your list, you're mostly kicking it old school. There's a couple little fan favorites that have joined the mix since then. A certain hero from the Hammers of Sigmar that I'll let you all unreveal. Maybe it's like, I don't know. Maybe it's Neve. Maybe it's I don't know. The guy with the Beastman head. But yeah, like it's a great convention, and it's always fun because just tournaments in general are great. So like you're going into Adepticon, and it's a big event. I know you play at places like NashCon. What were you expecting in the meta? Were you following what happened at the LVO? Because the LVO had a big allocation of Stormcast, probably more than I would have expected. And since then as well, as I've mentioned, you've had the hunt, which is that rule set where you've got priority targets, things like long strikes, your dragons, fulminators are giving away extra VP when they die. And you got prime hunters as well. What were you thinking and what were you expecting going into Adepticon?
I was kind of expecting the same. I was expecting Stormcast to be a huge contingent. I was expecting to see a lot of Storm Drake. I was expecting to see some cheeky Cities of Sigmar lists that I thought would be kind of tough, and then kind of a smattering of it. Outside of that, I wasn't real sure what to expect. Once I was there, I was actually pretty pleasantly surprised with how much variety there actually was. There was, I think I only saw 2 like just dragon spam lists, and they didn't end up actually doing that well. But there was a lot of Stormcast, but there was about as much Stormcast as there was Soulblight Gravelords, and what else? There was about as much Nurgle. So Nurgle was really popular. And then there was actually a ton of war clans. There was actually more war clans than anything else, which kind of took me by surprise. But I saw a lot of dual cabbage lists with lots of Gorgruntas and all that. People like to smash things with the orcs.
Were you worried about any of those prime hunter stuff going into Adepticon? Like given, because there's an interesting question around, do I drop some of those priority targets or do I still get more value from them by having long strikes? I'm better off than dropping it for Judicators, for example. Did that come into play with your list construction, or did you look, I don't really know how this is going to affect me just yet? Like, what was your thinking?
I mean, for me, I'm a terribly slow painter, so there was absolutely no way that I was going to swap anything out at that late of an hour. And so for me, it was really just kind of a thought experiment as to is this really going to matter? Is there any way to play around it? And I think it definitely comes into play. I think when you're going up against somebody else who's using those targets, I think it kind of, if you're both good, then you're both probably going to get a couple of extra cheeky points, right? You're going to say, okay, well, these fulminators, I'm gonna blow them down with my long strikes, but then I'm gonna try and pick them up with Bastian, or I'm gonna pick them up with, a couple mortal wounds from some liberators or something. But if you're both playing kind of the same sort of list, then you can probably cancel that out. I think the interesting part comes in when you have some of these allegiances or these armies that don't really show up on that list. They can rack up a lot of extra points that you can't really make up. I played like a Illumina Realm Lords for my last match, and he took out my fulminators, and that's 2 extra points that I was not going to be able to get from him anywhere in his list. And if he'd have taken out my long strikes as well, that's 4. That's 4 victory points. That's a lot of victory points to overcome. And if it's if they're a good player and it's a good list, it just doesn't kind of reach into that kind of meta or OP sort of level, then I think that's where the sweet spot is, where they can really kind of make some extra ground that may be hard to make up.
Yeah, I had a really good game against Daughters of Cain the other week, and my Gloomspite Gits had killed a unit of 10 bow snakes. I got Kragnos into combat, cleared them out, and it was just a massive victory point swing because Kragnos doesn't give away the points, so he's actually not a priority target, and he gets to benefit under Gloomspite Gits. So it's fascinating. But I think what I'm hearing from you as a Stormcast player is that when I look at my units that are identified as a priority target, it's probably not enough for me to go, oh, long strikes are on this list, oh, fulminators on this list. I'm going to turn my fulminators into concussors, or I'm going to turn my long strikes into judicators or some type of other shooty, I don't know, the ballista. I was going to say Bastillodon. I'm like, you don't have Ballistodons. The ballista. It's not enough for you to kind of swap it out because the benefits are still there. But you got to be smart again with maybe grinding down your target. but try not to maybe kill it outright with long strike.
Right.
No, that's cool. No, it's interesting because like it was a question that I had because yeah, I mean things have changed, and when you start going up to the top, you're going to start having like I know a lot of the Dragons players often found themselves in a mirror match at the LVO, which was part of the challenge. Why do you think Stormcast Dragons didn't do as well maybe at LVO at Adepticon? Do you think it was because people have had their fun and now they're kind of going back into maybe a less dragony spam list? Do you think maybe all dragons isn't the way to go anymore?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Like I said, there weren't a lot of them where it was just nothing but dragons. And I didn't talk to those people, so I don't know if they were like, just taking it because they thought it'd be fun, or if they were really expecting to win with them, or what. But I think they've it's kind of been on the top of the meta for a while. People are kind of they kind of know what to expect. And now with the predatory stuff, that's extra points you can get. Since we're in GUR, that's a lot of extra points too, because that's one thing that I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about is, like in my list, I've got no monsters, so I'm not giving up any extra VPs. Whereas if I'm going up against somebody who's got, 4 monsters, well, I can space those out and pick up, 3 or 4 extra VPs, which might turn the tide. And there's no way for them to necessarily make those points up, all else being equal.
Yeah, and look, like this is from a purely competitive point of view. First off, Adepticon's final standings hasn't been published yet, so when it does, maybe I will find that in the 10th place there was a Stormcast Dragon list, so we don't know just yet. But and I'm not saying if you do want to run all the dragons and you're like me and you're trying to push Krondus and Karazai into a list, that you're not doing anything wrong. It's more just about what we're seeing as the meta evolves. And I mentioned that Gloomspite list. One of the things, and I know this is not the Gloomspite show, I'm not going to go too long about it, but I wanted to test a theory around the horde meta because I've had bad experiences from long strikes and fulminators when I've run really elite forces. And I thought to myself, what happens when I put 100 idiots on the table? I don't care if you'd run your fulminators into my list. I don't care. And I wanted to test to see how it went. And it was fascinating. I went 3-0 at this particular tournament. But what was fascinating was just how hard it was for many people to whittle down the bodies, especially when I'm using Rally, especially when I'm using like Emerald Life Swarm, just bringing back body after body after body. And it was just hard to be on the objective. And I know some people like myself, like Vince Ventrella and Weimer Weekly, we're talking about, are we on a cusp of a horde meta? And I think maybe we are. So maybe, again, that plays into the dragon, right? Because your dragon breaths are just not consistent, at least at a tournament level. And if we are seeing more zombies,
I think, I think we could definitely, I think the horde would counter the current meta pretty well. One of the things I took away from, at least, my experience, the five games that I had at Adepticon was there's just a lot of mortal wounds floating around. Like people are just doing a lot of mortal wounds, and that's a pretty good counter to Stormcast. And so if people, but again, if people are relying on a bunch of mortal wounds and you show up with 140 bodies, then you don't really care about mortal wounds anymore. You can kind of just tank them, play for the objectives, and I think a lot of people just aren't going to be prepared for that. So no, I think that's definitely one way that the meta could go. And I mean, I think I'd be interested to see it go that direction.
Yeah, and that's part of this discussion, right? It's like, what did you learn about your army, and what did you learn about Stormcast at the Adepticon, and like, how are you thinking about it now that we've got Daughters of Cain, Nighthaunt, Fire Slayers, and someone else I forgot to mention. Like, we've got those factions coming up. Either they've dropped or a book's about to drop, and we've just got the Incarnate as well. So let's go back to Stormcast. So you've got your Adepticon list. What did you build around? Like, what were some of your considerations? Were you trying to counter any particular armies? Were you did you know the battle plans in advance? Like, what was your thinking when you come up with the list?
So no, we didn't know the battle plans ahead of time, but and you know, this may or may not be particularly interesting to people, but the main thing was this conversion here. I don't know if you can see that very well. But it's a fulminator that's been converted to look like a Knight of Bretonia. I don't know how familiar you are with the old world.
Mate, what you don't know is I'm actually converting my Stormcast right now using Empire Bretonia and Demigryph Knight heads. So I've got all of the Breton. Yeah, so I'm doing a very medieval style as well. So
okay, so that was you know, that was actually the main reason I even got into Stormcast, because I initially didn't really like the look. You know, I didn't like the heads, and then when I saw the Dracothian Guard models, I'm like, actually, you know, I could carve these off and I could put some heraldry on, do some head swaps, do some lance swaps. I'm like, that would actually be pretty sick. And so that was what brought me to Stormcast to begin with. And, you know, I've always loved the fulminators. And, you know, obviously in 3.0, fulminators are really good. They're really efficient. And so, you know, that was kind of where I started with the list. Is, you know, I knew I was going to have some fulminators in there, and I wanted to support them. And, you know, even though fulminators are pretty quick, they don't quite have the power projection that I think you need. And so I kind of put the long strikes in there as a kind of to force my opponent to come to me. You know, if you don't come to me, then I'm just gonna destroy you with long strikes. So you've got to come to me, and then the fulminators are a great, you know, counterpunch to that. So that was kind of my thinking there. Is, you know, I love the fulminators. I wanted to bring them. The long strikes, I think, complement them. They're kind of one of the big power pieces that I think help keep the Stormcast competitive. And then after that, you know, I wanted to put some pieces that I thought were a little bit more fun, a little bit more interesting, gave me a little bit more flavor, a little bit more utility. And I kind of get a lot of that with my hero selection. I don't know if we want to go into the list in depth now, or if you want to hold off on that.
I'll bring up the rules in a minute, because I want to get your thinking behind because part of this, right? Because not everybody here wants to run hammers, right? You know, I'm a big Hallowed Knights player. I really enjoyed the lore. I remember listening to the audio book around Gardas, and I'm like, yep, cool. Hallowed Knights are my jam. I actually didn't even look at the rules I was so entwined into like play guard, and I went, nah, I'm going to play Hallowed Knights. And I looked at the rules. I'm like, cool, okay. Like hammer's probably better. I think there was another particular build. I'm like, yeah, it probably does better in, I can't remember what. I mean, it was like Celestial Vindicators.
Celestial Vindicators are pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was the other one. I'm like, yeah, my list would probably do better there, but I just love the lore of Hallowed Knights. But I got to ask you, burning question, as Hades mentioned, why did you convert the Bretonia head? Like, why was it just because you didn't like the Stormcast head, or was it actually something a little bit more behind there?
Yeah, so you know, because the stock Stormcast helmets, to me, you know, they kind of have that sort of, at least the first ones kind of had that Mr. Roboto kind of look. You know, they kind of look like robot men. And so I was really put off by those, to the point where I wasn't very interested. And so when I thought about the Bretonian switch, and I mean, in Bretonia, they're all about the heraldry and all that kind of stuff. And the helmets have, you know, all that flavor and stuff on top. So I felt like I had to do the helmet swaps there.
We're kindred spirits. I agree with you. I'm not a fan of the Faceless Legion, which is kind of the inspiration of the old style. And I think I fell in love with the newer style, especially like the Vindictors and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I love this new sleeker. And I'm actually trying to think about how do I convert long strikes out of the new Thunderstrike armor, but with like the chunky crossbows, because the arms just won't fit properly. So I'm in this bizarre world.
Yeah, I did.
I'm like,
actually, one of the ways I actually got myself a little excited about bringing long strikes was I did a pretty heavy conversion, because I don't know, you know, how familiar you are with Bretonian lore, but the knights aren't allowed to use ranged weapons. And so in the Bretonian armies, only the peasants actually used ranged weapons. And so what I actually did was I took some Bretonian peasants, and then I pillaged the big crossbows from the new Cruel Boys sets. I think they're Bolt Boys. Is that right?
Yeah. Okay, mate.
And so I have that with the peasant bowman on it. So it kind of looks like this somewhat ramshackle, big crossbow ballista sort of thing. And then I've got like a, Bretonnian knight or a men-at-arms shield kind of propping it up so that they're shooting. So
I think you're a brother from another mother. Like, I feel we're kindred spirits here. Mate, I'm a 3rd edition Empire person. I looked over the fence and looked what happened. You fancy pants Bretonians were doing, but I'm all about my gunpowder Empire. But yeah, I'm down. I've actually been really inspired. Like, as I've gotten into the lore, I've really enjoyed the Stormcast lore a whole lot more, I think. So I dig what you're doing. But talk to me about the rules. Otherwise, this show will be about lore as opposed to tactics and lists. Like, this is a slippery slope for me. When you look at the Stormcast, by the way, like, spoiler alert, you ran Hammers of Sigmar. You didn't run. So I'll get to your sub-allegiances soon. But how important are the rules for Stormcast allegiance, and what made you go with not Signs of the Storm? You went Stormkeep as a part. Because I think a lot of people are kind of like, where do I go? Pros and cons. Talk to me about the rules that you're tapping into.
So, for one of the things that made me go with Stormkeep was I just thought that the rules were more fun, honestly. Scions is kind of stock Stormcast rules that we've been playing with the whole time. And, it can be really good. I think it can be really good from a psychological standpoint because, I've seen so many opponents sit there and just rack their brains about, oh no, he could deep strike over here. I'm gonna spread out my stuff. I'm like, I don't really care. I didn't want to do that. You're keeping those units out, out of the battle, and I didn't even have to do anything. So Scions is great, and I think even in my list, Scions is actually probably the more meta choice. Especially against some of the more dangerous matchups, I think. But I really like Stormkeep's rules. They were new. I wanted to try them. And I do think they're pretty valuable. They kind of answer one of the big problems with Stormcast, which is you just don't have that many bodies. If there's ever a situation where you want to fight for control of an objective, generally you're having to blow people off of them. You're having to kill everything off of the objective, and you're going to have to take it by force. You can't put bodies on the point to actually compete for it. Whereas with, Stormkeep, I take 3 squads of Redeemers, 3 squads of Liberators, and, that's 45 bodies in terms of competing for points. And that, that can come in really clutch. And I think depending on the matchup, it can actually be better than Scions, but against some of the more, especially like the mirror match, one of the matches I played against was Stormcast, and he had the long strikes with the teleport, and he was a 1-drop, and so against that matchup, I would have much rather had Scions and just put my long strikes in the sky so that they're nice and safe, and then I can bring them down and shoot. Whereas what actually happened was he teleported and shot most of my long strikes off the board, and now I'm kind of playing from behind, and so a priority roll actually came in pretty clutch in that game, to keep to kind of keep me in it until I could pull it out in the end. But no, I think both sets of rules are really good. I think Scions, at least with my list, is probably the better choice, but I just like Stormkeep better, and I think it's more fun. And like I said, against some matchups, I think it is definitely better just because it lets you compete for those objectives with bodies, whereas you normally just can't outnumber people.
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? Because when I think about even my own list selection, with Deepkin really starting to emerge, right? And, the Forgotten Nightmares forcing you to shoot at the closest unit, having those long strikes at the back of the board and having to shoot something you don't want to shoot. Signs of the Storm being able to drop them wherever that you need them to drop. And then obviously you can't use the Holy Command in the hero phase until they're down. But, if Deepkin really become popular, I can see Scions, especially if you're investing into like long strikes and shooters, to be a valuable option. But you're 100% right. Every time I played against Stormcast, I'm always winning on the objectives. And it's really a battle of how long can I hold my objectives versus how long does it take for you to clear the objectives? Because I've always got more bodies. I'm always counting towards more. One model out of your unit does really hurt a lot. And when you bring in the Redeemer units, it just gives you more control, especially when it gets to, is it turn 3 where all objectives count, where it's only those.
Yeah, so it's turn 3, but one thing that people don't quite remember is that the wording on it is that it just has to be partially in your territory. And so there's a lot of scenarios like this, pretty much all the ones that split it right down the middle. That center objective, it's in my territory or turn 1, because it just has to be partially in. So some of those objectives, you're counting for 15 right out of the gate. There was one, we played the one where there's 3 objectives on the center line. And that was the one game that I actually outdropped my opponent. And I actually had the choice to go. And he was playing Fire Slayer, so I was worried about pushing off all his bodies because he's got that damn 4-up save. And so I actually just was really aggressive, and I just threw all my Redeemers on each of the objectives, and he just never moved me off of them.
Would you bring in any Cities of Sigmar units into the list? Because when you're Stormkeep, you can bring 1 in every 4 as a coalition cities.
I looked at it, and I think I looked at some cheap units that could give me bodies, but at the end of the day, I decided I'd rather just take more Liberators, because Liberators are surprisingly tanky. I've had so many situations where people expect to go in and push a min unit of Liberators off of a point, and they don't realize that they're base 3-up save, they're sitting in cover. I can all out defense, and you can bring in -2 rend, and I'm still rolling a 3-up armor save with a 6-up ward save, and that takes more time than most people think. Generally it takes at least like double the points to actually move those Liberators. And when you're worried about fulminators and thunder and long strikes and Bastian, usually you don't have a lot of extra oomph to worry about moving a Liberator off of a point.
No, and I've seen some good lists where they've used like the Anointed on Frost Phoenix as a really, one, it's a monster, 2, it's super durable, 3, the bubble of -1 to hit around, -1 to wound around it, sorry, can be very valuable, but it's a big points investment, which if you've got it, awesome. Yeah, like as Obsidian is saying, the Liberator is quite a cheaper. I look at somebody's list and I see, as you said, Bastian, Longstrike, Judicators, other types of units. I'm like, cool, they're my primary targets I need to bring down. But actually, it's the humble Liberator who can just sit in an objective and just take the damage, and is often being ignored.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting question from Elias, actually. I wasn't planning on talking about this because I feel at the moment old cast works really well. So you all the things in the old original kind of box. The new cast are doing quite well. But then you've got the Sacrosanct, the stuff that came out with Soul Wars. What are your thoughts on the Soul Wars models? Your Sequitors, your Evocators, your Kitty Cats, and obviously the Taurolon is quite good at the moment. But just generally, where do you stand on like Sacrosanct?
I like Sacrosanct. I just think right now, to me, the core of the Sacrosanct is kind of the Sequitors. And I think the Sequitors are just a little overcosted right now, because the Liberators can do what I want them to do, and the Sequitors just cost quite a bit more, unfortunately. I think if they came down a little bit, I think they'd be an interesting choice. But for now, they're just a little overcosted, and I think they're kind of suffering from the we used to be really strong, especially like the Evocators used to be insanely strong, and so they all of that kind of got toned down a little bit and kind of got hit with the point hammer a little bit.
I love Crazy Horsepool Castro is telling me to stop talking about Sacrosanct, and then follows it up by telling me about the list he's building around Evocated Kitty Cats. So,
yep.
Is it the points? Like if General's Handbook 2022 comes around and the Sacrosanct goes down in points, Is that enough, do you think, to reconsider it from a competitive point of view?
It depends on how much. I think if they got a drastic points decrease, then I think yes. But I don't think they're going to get that big of a points decrease. I would be pretty surprised.
So I guess what I'm saying is it's not the War Scrolls that are bad. It's just that at the moment they're overcosted for what you're getting, and because you've got so many good options. Like Stormcast is such a massive book, you have so many options. So it's like you're competing, right? It's like I can get more from it from somewhere else.
Yeah, no, it's the trade-off. Stormcast, you have a lot of options, so you're competing with a lot of other choices, and I think the Sacrosanct stuff just comes in a little too inefficient, I think.
Yeah, and as Obsidian's saying, some of the heroes in Sacrosanct are quite good. And I mentioned the Taurolon, for example, has become very popular in some lists. It's amazing that it's taken many years now for that old, not Balthasar Gelt model to become good. Like, I'm sorry, it's Gelt. I do not apologize. It's Gelt. But yeah, but why hammers? Like, is it because you want to run Bastian? So spoiler, we've talked about Bastian a few times. Is it purely because of Bastian, or is there something else that hammers is bringing to your list that the others doesn't bring?
It's primarily Bastian. I think the hammers rule is good. A 6-up ward isn't great, but it definitely helps save some wounds. And it can come in to just another layer of protection on an already pretty defensible unit can be pretty helpful. But no, the primary reason I went was just because I really loved Bastian's rules. I thought he was unique, and I thought I think he brings a lot to the list, and so I wanted to bring him, and so you got to go hammers.
All right, well, let's bring up the list. Let's stop teasing the folks and actually show off the list, and we can kind of get into the decision tree here, right? So you've gone Hammers of Sigmar in Stormkeep, you've gone Grand Strategy Hold the Line, and then the list consists of the Bastian. You've got yourself the Lord Arcanum on Griffcharger, which is the General, Master of Magics, Scintillating Trail with Chain Lightning. You've also gone the Lord Castellan with Arcane Tome and Celestial Blades. You've got a unit of 4 Dracothian Guard Fulminators and 6 Long Strikes. You've got 3 units of 5 Liberators, and then, loved it, a unit of 3 Aetherwings.
I love those Aetherwings.
Oh, they're so good. Like, I used to run them in Cities of Sigmar as like my 1 in 4. So like I'd always go like 8 drops or 12 drops so I could run 2 or 3 units of those idiots. Even when they were like 50, they were 50 points, so 60, 40, 50, 40, back to 65. They're so good. They're so underrated. Unfortunately, they get dropped a lot. You've gone Hunters, you've gone Warlord as your 2 battalions, and double Holy Command. You've gone the Call for Aid, and then for your Warlord, you've taken Thunderbolt Volley or either.
Yep.
But what kind of surprised me as well, and then I'll pass the mic to you, is your 9 drops. So a lot of people are talking about the drop to how low can you go, like a limbo. Limbo. No, not limbo. A 9 drops, right? So like you don't give a shit about who drops first. You've got a plan, right? So I'll be curious to find out why you've ignored Battle Reg in order to go Hunters and Warlord. But talk to me about what this list does, how it comes together, and how you kind of constructed it.
So the first thing I'll go ahead and answer your first question there about the battalion choice. For one, I kind of have always hated the race towards the 1 drop because 4 out of the 5 players that I played, they all had 1 drop, and I hate the idea of rolling off and having that be so impactful. And one of the ways that I found to get around that was Bastian. To some degree, he can help kind of mitigate the pain of not getting to choose. And in some sense, it actually kind of forces the opponent to make a kind of a bad choice, or, in my mind, because almost everybody that gets the choice will take the first turn. Because what I do here is I'll put the long strikes right on the front line, pointed right at one of their pretty targets that they don't want me to delete from the table, top of 1. And so I know pretty much with a certainty that they're going to make me go first. And then I'm going to redeploy the long strikes in a safe position. And their first turn, they're not going to get a lot. Now, this is somewhat matchup dependent. Like the Stormcast matchup, he didn't care. He could get my long strikes wherever I put them. But, a lot of people can't do that. And so I can actually threaten the long strikes with Bastian's redeploy. I can pull them back into a safe location. And now they're taking the first turn. They're probably not getting as much out of it as they'd hoped. And now the first double turn is me. And the last thing you want to see is a double turn with fulminators countercharging, long strikes double tapping. There's just a lot of carnage. And so that's kind of my thought process behind not really playing the one drop game that everybody seems to. And so I go, and for that I get the extra holy command, which I really love. Call for aid. That can be really clutch. I'll describe a little combo here in a minute that I really love. And then Hunters of Heartlands is actually really nice for preventing those untimely roars, because in this list I'm taking that Castello, and so I really like to stack all those armor buffs. And so if you're coming at me at Ren 2, Ren 3, and I really need every layer of that protection, then I really don't want you to roar my fulminators so that I can't all out defense them, because there's a pretty big difference between, fulminators on a 2-up save or a 3-up save or a 4-up save.
Or a 1-up save that I had to suffer recently. I'm like, oh, you're a dick.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's pretty easy to get that, with the Castellan's buff, all out defense, and a Mystic Shield, it's pretty brutal. So that's my thought process on the battalions, and how Bastian kind of helps me get away from the battle regiment, the one drop. And like I said, it did bite me in the ass one time.
Can I just ask really quickly, right? Because one of the cool things with Bastian, right? You mentioned the D3 hammers of Sigmar units can redeploy. So you've automatically got 1. You could spike up to 3. Mm-hmm. If you roll hot, let's say you roll a 3+, and you have extra 1 or 2 extra units that could be redeployed, do you redeploy other units? What are good units to redeploy? Or do you just ignore it and you only go for the long strikes? But obviously it's matchup dependent, right? I get it.
Yeah, no, for sure. Normally when I'm doing my deployment, I make sure that if I roll only the 1, that I'll be okay. I almost never bank on getting a 2 or 3. But at the same time, usually the only units that I'm worried about are the long strikes and the fulminators. So usually I'll try to make sure that at least one of those units is in a position that I'm okay with. And then the other one I can be super aggressive with. And then I know that when they tell me that they're going to take first turn, which they almost always do, I can redeploy those units into a safe location. But normally because the Arcanum and the Castellan, they have a lot of buffs, so that I usually want them central. So there's not usually a lot of point in redeploying them. I'd say maybe Bastian is a good one to redeploy because he's really good on his own. And so he's really good to put on a flank. If I decide after I see all the, see the battlefield and see everything, I'll be like, well, maybe I want Bastian over here. But normally I just plan for that one redeploy, just because I don't want to get myself into a bad position.
Something that I didn't appreciate on Bastian until it happened to me was the Thunderborn ability, because I mentioned I've been playing Gloom Spike Kits. Anyone who watches the channel in the past, they know I also play Sons. So when you roll those 35 dice against a Mega Gargant, or in the case that happened to me where I added +5 wound characteristic to my general, so it was 40 wound general, he got to roll 40 dice. Yep. And on a 6, he do an immortal wound. And I remember in the first turn, before I'd even rolled the dice, between the long strikes and Bastian, my opponent almost killed my Kragnos. Like literally, like there was that much damage between the long strikes and the mortal wounds, plus like rolling the 18 dice against Craggy. It's such a good ability. It's a really good ability.
No,
for where we're at currently in the game.
It's especially, I feel really bad. I feel really bad playing Sons of Behemoth players with this list because I just feel kind of dirty because they just destroy those Mega Gargants. I played one game at like a local tourney where the poor guy, I did the same thing I did, normally do, where I threaten the long strikes and he's like, oh yeah, I'm going to take first turn. I back up. He just kind of marches up the field. And then on my response, I picked up 2 of his 3 Mega Gargants. Yeah, because Bastian just nuked one of them. Then the long strikes double tapped, and then the fulminators charged the other one. And and he was just like, yeah, that's game. And I'm like, yeah, you're right, that is game. I'm so sorry. But yeah, no,
it's such a great combination. It's such a great little combination between them, right? Because Bastian just works really well. Where we are at the meta right now. Just the amount of multi-wound big monster heroes that are on really high armor saves, and you need the mortal wounds, and the long strikes won't pull them down, or at least it's going to take you a fair while. Bastian complements that so well.
Yeah, no, he's really, really good for just zapping those big high wound models with that. And I mean, that's what I'm saying is I love Bastian's War Scroll so much because he's got he's got the redeploy, which I'm leveraging a lot in this list, and that's just really fun to me. He's got that that big lightning strike Thunderborn ability, which is really fun and can be really clutch depending on your matchup. He's got a free essentially a free command point every turn, which is just outrageous. I basically never run out of command points. I pretty much always have enough command points to do whatever I want with, which is amazing. That gives you so much freedom. And then, the last thing, which is what normally most people think of as the first thing. But the last thing in my mind is that he heals completely any phase that he kills a model, which is can be really demoralizing when you throw him into a big unit of guys and they chip off 6 wounds and then he just cleans up, a bunch of dudes and then heals up all the way. He's an excellent, like, kind of tertiary unit. The fulminators and the long strikes are kind of my primary damage dealers, but whatever that third target is, or that kind of that secondary battlefield, I just throw Bastian in there, and he's a really good combo. Because if your opponent doesn't focus fire him, then he's just going to heal up, and they're just not going to make any progress.
But even if you do focus fire on him, he's a base 3-up armor save, has a 4-up ward, and then goes on and heals it, right? So like if you do, again, the Mystic Shield or that defense, whatever that combination might be, if you notice that, he's going to be attacking the heroes, he's a tough nut to crack.
Yeah, no, he really is. And I had a really funny match where he basically scared off an entire army from the center of the battlefield because I just layered all of my armor buffs on him, and I think I even did Finest Hour, and so he was going to be on a 2-up save regardless of what they did. And he was, due to some other stuff going on, he was like the only main piece I could put in the center of the table. But my opponent was just like, yeah, there's no winning here. If I charge him, he's just going to cleave my guys. I'm going to accomplish nothing. He's going to heal up. And so, yeah, he just backed off, and there was just Bastian left alone in the center of the battlefield, claiming it for his own. So it was pretty funny.
A burning question I've got to you about your list before I get you to explain a little bit about your other 2 heroes is, I notice, being a Stormkeep list, you don't have a Lord Relictor. And that's often a very common combination because you haven't got Signs of the Storm, and you can drop down anywhere on the board. And Stormcast is traditionally a very slow-moving army. That teleport from the Relictor is always very popular. Why didn't you take a Relictor? And did you notice that you really needed a teleport, or is there any time that you thought, man, I need it, or how'd you kind of get around it?
So that's a good question, and that's one of the first questions anybody looks at or says when they're looking at my list is like, where's the de facto elector that everybody's taking? And that teleport is really, really good, but the key to that question for me is the Lord Arcanamon, the Griff Charger, because he can teleport. Now he can't teleport a unit, but what I can do is if for one, he has the teleport, which still gives you about 50% of the functionality in my mind, because it forces them to always have to defend their objectives. They cannot just abandon an objective, because now he can just teleport on it and claim it, and that's one of the most useful things of a teleport in my opinion. And so he's accomplishing that. And if I really need more than just him, I can teleport him. I can throw the Liberators into something that's going to mulch them up, and then pop the call for aid, and pop the Liberators back there. So I can actually sort of hack a teleport with the Arcanum and some Liberators. And if you look at and when I was doing the the brainstorming on the list, I'm kind of looking at, do I really need that Relictor? And I'm looking at the list. I'm like, well, what do I really need it for? Most of the time, the Raptors don't need it, because their threat range is absolutely insane. The fulminators are generally fast enough to where they can get around the board. The Arcanum can teleport, and the Castellan pretty much stays in the middle to throw out his buffs anyway. So it's usually Liberators, maybe Bastian that that are kind of slow and kind of need that extra movement. But again, like I said, with my hack there, I can actually teleport a Liberator unit if I really need to. So it really just comes down to Bastian. And so what I have to do is make sure that I'm placing Bastian. Usually I place Bastian on one of the flanks right on the line, and he just kind of like Gotrek. He just first turn, he just kind of runs up as far as possible, and then he's actually kind of in range, and he's a little faster than Gotrek. He has a movement of 6 actually. So that's that's kind of my thought process there. The Relictor teleport is it's undeniably strong, but I decided that I really didn't need it, and it's one of the clutch things that the Griff Charger brings is, if I really need that teleport, he can kind of get me there if I need it.
I really dig I dig the Holy Command call for aid combination, because because you're sitting there going, right, well, I want to teleport a unit of Liberators, for example, right? Like you don't want to teleport your Dracothian Guard. You probably don't need to teleport your Vanguard Raptors unless you're trying to reposition them for some way. And I mentioned IDK is probably one of the only times that you want to be able to choose the battle. But do you construct a whole list just to respond to IDK's Forgotten Nightmares? Probably not. But I do like this little cheeky combination that maybe people aren't thinking about, because it's a good one. I like it.
Yeah, no, the Griff Charger is funny. I think out of my whole list, he was the only thing where people were like, oh, really? I didn't know that he could do that, because there was a lot of people that didn't realize he could teleport. And he actually has a really good War Scroll spell in the form of a heal, which can heal up to D6, which can be really clutch if you've got like a Fulminator sitting on 5 wounds, or you've got a hero sitting on 5 or 6 wounds. You throw that heal out there, and all of a sudden my really, really tanky units just got a bunch of healing. Even the Cycle of the Storm ability can be really, really clutch, just because again it kind of combos with how defensive all of my units are. Most of the time people think, well, one wound doesn't matter, but when it's the last wound on Bastian and he killed something, and then they thought they were going to kill Bastian, and now he's max health again, that's a lot of value. And I even had one case where I had my long strikes. The matchup against Stormcast, probably the one matchup that I was really, really worried about. I put my long strikes in some cover, and they actually survived with one guy because of the Griff Charger. He saved the last wound on him, and I was able to rally one.
And that's the thing, right? If you can hold just one model, then you can use rally. If it's Bastian, for example, or another hero, you could use the heroic action to kind of heal up. If you had Emerald Life Swarm, you had Indrasa, you could bring models back. There's so many different ways to kind of bring back your models from the dead. And obviously your list doesn't have Indrasa, but there's a lot of different ways to kind of tap into that particular rule. So I really like it a lot.
And it was a way to get that mount trait, that scintillating trail, which helps get off some of these spells, because some of these spells are actually really, really useful. Mystic Shield is crazy good now, and his heal is really nice. And so that you combine the scintillating trail with Master of Magic, and now he's actually not that bad of a caster.
I'm actually just looking it up. Like, what does it do? I don't think I'm familiar with
which one? Scintillating Trail?
Yeah, Scintillating Trail.
It reduces their dispel value by 1. It's worded really weird. It's kind of like a +1 to cast, but not really. It doesn't actually change the value by +1, but it reduces their dispel value by -1. So it makes it harder to dispel. Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing, but you combo that with Master of Magic, and it helps get off some of those clutch spells that you need, as long as you're not going up against like Teclis or a Slon or something.
So the Lord Arcanum on Griff Charger is bringing you to teleport. It's got a couple of really good couple of spells and abilities you can tap into, and obviously Master of Magic allows you to get some additional boosts for the reroll to the cast, which is going to be helpful. Is there anything else that the Lord Arcanum helps you with, or do you want to tell me a bit more about the Lord Castello, or even just like how the rest of it all fits together?
No, that's pretty much it. I mean, he is fast. So I'd say the other thing that he's bringing to the list is he's giving me another fast unit that, if I really need to hop on a point or something that's far away, or if I need to get to, for instance, there was some I was worried about getting to those long strikes, and the only 2 units that could actually pin them down first, I had the Aetherwings run up, and then I actually sent the Griff Charger out there, so the Aetherwings could take the Unleash Hell, and then the Griff Charger could actually complete the charge, hopefully kill a couple of them, and more importantly, prevent them from rallying and just keep them locked down so they're not shooting other stuff. So that's the other kind of. So a lot of little flavor things that add up to more than the sum of the parts kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like, in the game, in the moment, you're right. Like, Aetherwings can be great to accept and unleash hell. They could be a good screen because they're not going to give away broken ranks. They could be going up the board, protecting the Dracothian Guard from being pinned potentially, if your opponent's at the, deployed, defensively. There's a lot of great, they could be in a great little objective scorer or sitting behind the board. There's obviously a lot of great little utility and parts in the moment, which is kind of why we're kind of unpacking this to understand how you think about this and what you're doing. And if you don't have Aetherwings, or if you don't want to run the Aetherwings, well, then you could look for something else that might play a similar role. Does your Aetherwings, by the way, combine with your long strikes, or are you not combining them?
I kind of split it. So usually if I have need for them to kind of go on a flank and just kind of beeline it down that flank to compete for an objective that the opponent's just kind of ignoring, then I'll do that and not think twice about it and not worry about that +1 to hit from the for the Raptors. If I don't really have a great role for them, then I'll usually just send them upfield, so that they're kind of in a good location to kind of dive out. And then as a kind of an aside, they're getting that extra +1 to the long strikes, so that I don't have to spend the command point to all out attack on them pretty much.
Am I right to assume the Lord Castellan is there mainly for the +1 to the save warding lantern? Obviously, you've given him an artifact, and you've got another spellcaster and a general support hero. But is that the prime reason you've dropped the Castellan in?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's with Stormcast, they are one of the best beneficiaries of the save stacking, and having one that you can just hand out. You can always count on it. You don't have to worry about getting Mystic Shield off or all out defense or anything like that. And that extra +1 just can be oppressive to certain lists. I will say one of the things that I learned about this list is that the Lord Castellan is fairly matchup dependent. I didn't realize just how common it was for armies to just dump out mortal wounds from just basic units, like because the Fire Slayers book, like I didn't even see it before Adepticon, so I was kind of worried about getting kind of blindsided by Fire Slayers, and I actually ended up facing 2 Fire Slayers at Adepticon, and they didn't care at all about the Lord Castellan, because they're either doing mortal wounds or they're not doing anything. And they could do a lot of mortal wounds. And I played Lumineth Realm Lord. Pretty much all their stuff was coming from mortal wounds. So it was kind of funny, because I've had a lot of success with the Castellan going into a lot of armies, and he's just oppressive against certain matchups. But other matchups where 95% of their damage output is coming from mortal wounds, he doesn't matter quite as much. So
I mean,
he's
you're kind
still
of
really
forcing
good, but
you're obviously forcing our hand. The reason we're going into mortal wounds is because you got a whole bunch of 2-up armor saves, right? So
Yep.
you're kind of forcing us to find, because like half my army are a bunch of idiots who like Ren -1 or Ren -2. And when I go into that, that unit of fulminators who are on a 2-up or a 1-up save, and essentially ignoring my rend, and what have they got? 6 wounds apiece. Like, to pull them down without mortal wounds is ridiculously hard. Really hard.
Yeah, most people. The funny thing about the fulminator, like everybody knows how much damage those fulminators can do on the charge, but a lot of people don't quite respect how tanky they are. When you throw, you throw that warding lantern on there, throw a mystic shield on there, and then all out defense them. Like, you're not killing them unless you have mortal wounds. Like, I don't care what your rend is, you need mortal wounds, or they are just never gonna die.
So with your newfound knowledge of mortal wound, you clearly know a bit more. I'm only teasing you, but like now that you are seeing more and more mortal wounds, do you still stand by your choice of the Lord Castellan, or moving into future iterations, would you consider bringing in that Lord Relictor? Would you bring in some other type of support hero because maybe you don't need the +1 as much?
I don't. I still think I like the Lord Castellan more. Again, there's just there's some matchups like War Clans. I saw a lot of War Clans, and they can do a lot of damage, but the Castellan kind of makes it to where I don't really care anymore, because it's all rend 1, rend 2, and so I don't really care if you're just throwing a bucket of attacks with a bunch of damage because of your War Chanter. None of them are going to get through my 2-up save, and so I think there's certain matchups where he still gets a ton of value. I think the Relictor is really, really good. And that's probably what I would take if I dropped the Castellan. But like I said, the Griff Charger gives me just enough of that teleport ability to where I don't think I need. So to answer your question, probably what I would do is if I dropped the Castellan and added a Relictor, then I would probably reevaluate the Griff Charger, because now that teleport isn't so unique in the list anymore. And so I would probably drop the Griff Charger and see what I can do with those couple extra 100 points.
And obviously not that I'm trying to convince you to change your list, but it's more about now that we're kind of, and the meta is constantly evolving. So, what will you face? Are we going to see more bodies on the table? And, things, for the example, we're seeing a lot more Soulblight now. And as you mentioned, a lot more Iron Jaws and Nurgle. Nurgle is really starting to kind of rise to the top. People are starting to kind of crack the science and they're starting to build that in. Mm-hmm. And that durability. So how do I respond to Nurgle? All of us are thinking about that, right? So it's just a consideration. I think still right now you don't want to focus into one particular attack, right? You could look for all of the ward saves in the world. The minute you come up against armies that have high rend, you got nothing. So I think it's good to have a bit of both. And given that your spellcasters aren't the greatest, it's not like you've got really strong spellcasts. I love the fact that this is coming for an ability as opposed to a spell. So if Mystic Shield fails, you've still got the Warden Lantern, you've still got all that defense. And obviously you've protected yourself with Hunters of the Heartland so that you can't be roared at, which means you can still do your all-out defense.
Yeah, I would be really worried about facing a monster in the next season when Hunters of the Heartland presumably goes away. If I lose that, so now I can be roared, so I can't get all out defense. If I drop the Castellan, well now, what am I? I'm banking on Mystic Shield and that's it. So no, I think the Castellan's still really, really good. I guess I didn't quite fully appreciate how many entire lists are out there that can just every single unit does damage almost exclusively through mortal wounds. And I knew they were out there. At this Adepticon, I kind of got beat in the face with several lists where it's like, nah, all of our damage is coming from mortal wounds, and we don't really give a shit that you're at a 2-up save,
Yeah. And this is kind of goes back to at the start of the show when we're talking about Stormdrake Guard and Stormdrake Guard giving away the priority target. If you happen to kill it, you're going to get bonus points as well as the monster points. And the fact that their mortal wounds, they've got some good, attacks in combat, but their mortal wounds from their breath attacks are short range and inconsistent. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. It's a really interesting one. A great place to be in right now. That's why I love Age of Sigmar with the scissor paper rock. It's not, one particular faction dominates. It's really, it's hard matchups and it's hard decisions throughout because you just never know at a tournament.
Yeah.
You got your Dracothian Guard and you got your Vanguard Raptors. We know what they do. We know what they're doing. Is there anything that you'd call out specifically around maybe not necessarily what they are, but how you use them or why you use them when it comes to maybe some of these more obvious choices?
Like I said, I think probably the only thing that I would say that's maybe a little bit of a wrinkle is just how tanky those fulminators are with the combination of the Castellan. A lot of people are expecting those fulminators to hurt on the charge, but a lot of times I'll use them sort of as kind of a hammer and anvil unit wrapped in one, where it's like, yeah, they can deliver that punch, but what I'm really wanting is them to just kind of sit there and not die. For instance, there was that Fire Slayers matchup where I outdraft my opponent and I went aggressive. I actually just threw my fulminators into his big unit of what are they, berserkers, the Volkite berserkers, I think.
Yeah.
And I knew that he was going to chew them up, but I knew that some of them were going to survive. I did the math quick in my head, and I should have lost 2, and I ended up losing 3, which sort of threw a little bit of a wrench. But that one, even that one fulminator, I threw all my buffs on him. I think I healed him once. And, he kind of just sat there and tanked that big 15-man unit for like a couple of turns. And that, that's all that time is time that he's not contesting the objectives with that big, hard to kill unit.
Yeah, the best time I've ever had against fulminators is when I ran Marathi into them. Because then I take the tanks. I'm like, cool, bro. Yep. I got 3. You can only take 3 wounds. And I'll just tie you up.
No, I hate Marathi. It's especially worse when you have the big Marathi into something and the baby Marathi into something, and it's tying both units up, and they're both doing nothing. That's the worst. because then you just have to retreat and hope that you get the double turn, basically.
How do you get the most out of fulminators, given that they have a big target on their head? Like, people know what they do, and the minute they see it, Vanguard Raptors and fulminators are always a priority for your opponent to kill. They'll put a lot of focus to get rid of them, and now you're give away extra VP when it happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of just play into it. Honestly, is I know my opponent knows what they do. I know my opponent is going to put a lot of effort onto them, and I kind of just accept that, and I say, okay, well, the fulminators are going to go do what fulminators do, but I'm going to kind of step back, and I'm going to make sure that Bastian is sneaking up this flank and just completely taking out their chaff and the objectives, and all my liberators are just going to quietly sit on the points and start, racking up all those victory points, while the opponent is, laser focused on these fulminators that are right in the middle of their face, wrecking havoc like they're going to do. And you just kind of, again, you kind of just use that knowledge that your opponent is going to focus on them and try and take them away from the objectives and say, okay, well, I'm going to focus on this side of the battlefield. You're going to have to come over here to deal with them. And I'm just slowly going to be, racking up these objective or these victory points behind while you're dealing with the fulminators, which are even harder to kill than normal because they're, they've got that warding lantern on them from the Castello.
I think it makes it tough as well, right? As an opponent, I've got Bastian, I've got long strikes, I've got fulminators, and I've got your things that are scoring objectives, your liberators. Where do I focus my attacks? How do I project my power? And the amount of focus I need to pull down one of those units, it's not like I can just chip, against other factions, I can just chip away at units and eventually the attrition will take it over by turn 3. But with you, it's almost like the undead strategy where I've got to literally focus everything I can to bring it down, because I can't leave it with 1 or 2, because things will grow back. You can still take advantage, especially you mentioned the Holy Command. You can bring things back. I had a game, I mentioned this on another stream. I had a game against 4 fulminators. The jerkwad rolled three 6s on his rally and brought a unit of 1 back to a unit of 4. Those things happen. Those things happen. You can't,
that's brutal.
You can't not let this one idiot run around, because that can happen, and then I'm back to square one.
Even rallying 1 fulminator is just so brutal. I mean, I lost 2 fulminators one time, and just because I have Bastian, I have the extra command points. I'm like, sure, I'll try and rally these guys before they charge in, and I just rolled a 6. I'm like, okay, well, that's huge. That's so huge to get 1 extra fulminator in there after you did all that work to kill it.
Yep. At least the rules have changed now, because I think this was before when you could rally in. No, ignore that. I was thinking of another different rule set. But Chase asked an interesting question. I was partially thinking about Chase's question. Why call for aid as opposed to steadfast advance? Now, I think you've already talked a bit about the call to aid side, and I think some really good magic there. But thoughts on something like steadfast advance instead to help the fulminators?
So I initially took steadfast advance because, again, I love my fulminators, but the critical part there is that you cannot steadfast advance and get the auto 6 on the run, because they're both command abilities. And so the usefulness of that run and charge dwindles a lot when you're basically just rolling the dice and hoping that you get what you want. So I think if I could do both of those, if I could run and charge and auto 6 the run, I would definitely take it. But because you can't, that's a lot of variability, and it's just, the call for aid is really, really useful as well. And so I ended up going for the call for aid instead of steadfast advance.
Imagine fulminators being able to run and charge and auto advance 6.
Yeah, no, it would be gross. It would be really gross. But with the with the die, I mean, I still don't think it's a bad choice. I think with the fulminators, it gives them that extra threat, and it kind of makes your opponent think twice. It's like, okay, well, if he runs and charges, that's 6 extra inches. That's a lot of threat range, and so that could really play some tricks on your opponent. But ultimately, I just decided that I didn't want to bank on that variability, and I got enough use out of Call for Aid that I wanted to go with that. It's just like I said previously, the Liberators are surprisingly tanky, especially in this list, and they count for 3 models apiece, and so it's pretty demoralizing when your opponent kills them, and then I'm just like, oh, I'll spend a command point, and they're back, and you have still. I mean, I've one of the sort of oppressive, and I do worry about this from my MPE when I'm playing, not at a big GT, is I play a lot of matches where at the end of the day I didn't lose any units. I'm almost tabling my opponent, and they didn't kill anything because the only Liberator unit that they did actually manage to pick up, I just brought back from with Call for Aid, and it's really hard to get units off the table in this list.
So how are you doing that? So, and obviously, again, we're talking at a very competitive level here, folks. Like, you don't have to go out and crush your enemies at your local one dayer and make them to cry. Like, you can always pull back on certain things. Maybe bring concussors as opposed to fulminators at your next local store event. But how is it that you're doing that? Like, talk me through how you can go through a game without really losing a model. Like, what does it look like?
A lot of times, like I said, and part of it is that that cheeky Bastian redeploy is I'll put the long strikes in a really threatening position. My opponent's like, oh man, I don't want to lose this key unit, so I'll go first, and then I redeploy, and when I redeploy, all of a sudden they don't have really any good targets, because the fulminators are safe, the long strikes are safe. And so the only thing they can really reach is like Bastian. Usually I deploy him in cover. And because usually it's pretty easy to find some cover for a single model. And then the Liberators, so pretty much the only thing they can really reach are the Liberators. And like I said, that first Liberator unit that you actually manage to kill, I can just bring it back. And usually the matches that are really, really lopsided are the ones where I get that double turn, just because some people just can't take 3. You're talking about 3 volleys from the long strikes and fulminators on the charge, potentially 2 of them, because if they just go in and destroy their first unit, I get the double turn. Now they just turn and they torpedo another unit.
Yeah.
That's just a lot of firepower. And it's like I said, it's mostly when I get the double turn, but I get a lot of double turns because everybody's taking the 1 drop. I do the redeploy trick with Bastian, and they end up not getting a lot of value out of that first turn, which that's kind of always been one of my concerns about taking first turn, is if you don't get a lot of value out of that first turn, then you can really pay for it when they get that priority roll in the first time.
2 follow-up questions. 1, how do you protect yourself against the double turn? Because this is probably one of the things that I see often when I'm talking, especially in Discord, and people's frustrations with the double turn. They're like, I'm really good at being offensive, but when that dice roll doesn't go my way, I feel like it's good game. I've ruined myself, things like that. So given that you've said that, you can win so many games with the double turn, how do you protect yourself so you don't get tabled?
Well, so like I said, the first, one of the things is not giving your opponent the ability to strike anything on the first turn. That's really critical. In some lists you can't do that. The like I said, the mirror match, there's just really no hiding from long strikes, unfortunately, that are teleporting around the table. But against a lot of more standard armies that kind of have to slog up to you and and go through your chaff, which Liberators make really good chaff. It's hard to really get those critical units off the table quickly for the opponent. And in this list in particular, I can be kind of aggressive without paying for it too much, because I know that I will be the first. I will get the first double turn almost every time, and so I don't necessarily have to think about, well, am I overextending myself? Because I know that I'm going to get the first double turn, and then by the time my opponent gets the opportunity to double turn me back, usually the battlefield is just kind of decimated, and it's harder for them to really capitalize and make you pay for that if you've already gotten the opportunity to double turn them. But generally, I think I put myself in position, and again, in this list, it's really nice because I have the warding lantern, and so if I'm worried about kind of a counter punch, if generally I don't count on the double turn, obviously, and so I'm counting on a counter punch, and so the warding lantern helps that out a lot. If I'm putting Bastian in a dangerous place, I know I've got finest hour, and again, it's easy to put a single model into some cover. Liberators sitting in cover hold points, really, really well. So it's mostly the, relying on that armor save, leveraging it with Warning Lantern and the terrain. And then that hammers a Sigmar, 6-up ward, make sure that I'm within 12 of the objectives, so that I've got that extra little bit of a blade of protection there.
So are you finding that people they go first against you and you're going second in the first battle round? Is that what I'm hearing?
Almost without a doubt. I mean, there are some matchups, because most of the time because really the only way to avoid me hitting something you care about is to either have everything that you care about off the field or deployed on the back table edge. And if you don't have access to deploying off the battlefield, usually putting stuff on the back table edge really puts you in a bad spot, because things are far from where they need to be. And so usually when people try to do that, they're just like, well, I can't afford to do this. And so they kind of just sigh and put the units within range of the long strikes. And then they're like, okay, well, I can't afford for him to just double tap those long strikes into a unit that I need. And so I'll just take that first turn, and then, good players know that I'm just going to redeploy, but they usually analyze it and decide that the alternative is worse, pretty much.
Yeah. And then obviously it goes your way, you take advantage. If it doesn't go your way, then you haven't lost too much.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the benefits of Stormcast being so tanky, is that it's usually hard to just pick up units, and I think the one weakness is those long strikes. If I'm going up against somebody that can reach the long strikes, then things get a lot more dicey.
Yeah, that was probably what I found in one of my last games. Was it was all about getting, I was running Sons, right? So I could move up the board, and I knew that you're not going to pull down a Mega Gargant with long strikes, even with Holy Command. Like, he's going to take the Fulminators and Bastian to kind of pull it down. But it's about that focused fire. I was throwing rocks. I was doing the best thing possible to take out those long strikes, because otherwise I'm going to get tied up in the middle of the board. You're just going to pop me, while I'm trying to fight through a really tough combat, whether you're on the objective or I'm with, multi-wound Fulminators, while the long strikes are just kind of so the longer you can pin somebody in, and then Bastian's obviously doing the mortal wounds.
The long
really
strikes,
important.
if you can't pick up the long strikes, then I'm just going to table you. And so you've kind of have to have an answer to the long strikes, whether that's your own ranged, or it's some sort of teleports or something.
And what I've learned as well is, if you can't do that, then taking out the Liberators and not just kill one unit, kill all of the Liberate units, because you can bring one back, but no one else is really scoring on the objective. So you play the objective game, and you don't try to force your hand too much with the long strikes. At least that's what I found.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right, and that's one of the reasons I really like the Stormkeep, is it helps me compete for those objectives that much better. But if you can't get to the long strikes, taken out all the liberators, because once you take out all the liberators, like my model count is just so low that it's so easy to just capture those points, and there's not really anything I can do about it other than try and table you basically at that point.
Correct. Yeah. Like I'm looking at your list again. Like I'll bring it up for anyone who might have joined late. Like when I look at this list, and if I pull down the 3 units of 5 liberators, so Stormcast players, I guess, think about how you're protecting your libs, and anyone who doesn't play Stormcast listening for the tricks, pulling down those units of liberators, and all of them, not just one. There's no bodies. Your long strikes aren't going in the middle of the board to kind of hold an objective. Everyone else is really like one. Your Dracothian Guard are what, 8? They count.
Yeah.
So they count on. They don't count a lot on the objective. So
no, at that point,
point,
the only hope I have is I have to table you. And the good thing is that fulminators and long strikes do a lot of damage. But they have to do that damage quick enough to make sure that I'm not getting too far behind in the points game.
And that was going to be the other side, is that then it's just me racking up points and holding out as much as possible. And hopefully at the end of it, the gap is, and now that the priority targets can't kind of come into play, then maybe the gap will be too big by the time. And libs obviously don't give it away, but it becomes hard to chase.
Yep.
Any thoughts on the Incarnate? So we're on like 24 hours after everyone's released their content around the Incarnate of Gur. Would you consider getting the Kronspine?
I don't think so.
Price aside. We're not talking price. We're talking at the unit.
No, I think it's an interesting unit. I think it's probably going to be most interesting to armies that don't have access to things like monsters natively. If you're just desperately in need of a monster, then I guess this gives you access to one where you didn't have one previously. So that could be good. To me, I don't. One of the things is it eats endless spells, right? But I'm not overly concerned about endless spells right now. And it seems like it could be a little bit of a liability if your wizard gets sniped. Now, doesn't it like go crazy or something? I'm not sure if I've actually seen all of the rules, but
that's right. Yeah, like I was just curious if you'd had. And obviously you haven't had some proper time to think about it. It's 400 points. It's a good combat monster. Has some good rend and some good damage, especially like a lot of attacks. If it goes crazy, look, as long as you're outside of 3 inches from it, you're okay. Just don't be within 3 inches when it goes into wild form. But it could complement your Dracothian Guard quite well. If you were to drop, let's say, the Lord Arcanum and then found an extra 200 points somewhere, they could be a nice little power combo in the middle of the board. But I guess the question is, where do the points come from? So,
yeah, I mean, that's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot of points.
Yeah, 400 points. It's 1/5 of your list, right? So it is a big points investment. Would I drop Dracothian Guard for this? Probably not.
Yeah. And do you have to summon it like via a spell, or does it actually start on the table?
It starts on the table. It's bonded to a hero that's not named. It's like an enhancement, right? So one of the cool things that long strikes are going to be able to do is, if your opponent has the Incarnate set up, you pop the bonded hero, and then it's a bit wild. So you lose a couple of abilities. It becomes you can't issue commands to it. But the long strikes have the ability to, because you can't put it on a named hero. It's purely, so most heroes, like their basic generic long strike can kill them.
Yeah.
That's something to keep in mind if you're looking for more of a combat monster, because you don't really have the combat monsters in Stormcast. They're not native to you. I mean, you can get them through some things, but you don't have the Terrorgeist. You don't have this big just rip you apart.
Yeah, no, that is true. I think pretty much the only monster, because I was toying around with trying to fit in a monster into this list just so that I had access to the monstrous rampages. I had the ability to get those extra victory points for completing some of the battle tactics with a monster. And so I was kind of thinking about the Tarlon. It gives you some good utility, but I ended up not going with that.
Well, if you're going to go 400 points, that's a Phoenix, right? That's the Anointed on Frost Phoenix, right? So again, when we start playing with those points, it's pros and cons, and maybe the durability is better from a Frostheart Phoenix, and again, it synergizes well with Stormkeep, being that it is a storm card. Well, it's a coalition unit to you, but you've got yes, Chase, you've got Storm Drakes, but would I call it an absolute terror, guys? No, I wouldn't.
Star Drakes are not that scary in combat. I wish they were. I wish they were.
Yes, Jerome. Yes, you've got Gotrek. Yes, also,
yes, Gotrek.
Yeah,
I will say that I gave my opponent a little bit of a cheeky look when he scored 2 extra victory points for picking up my fulminators with Gotrek. I was like, really? Because Gotrek is ridiculous. He is just a blender. I would not call him a pushover piece at all, but he got 2 extra victory points for killing my fulminators in a single round of combat.
Well, it happened to me, as I mentioned, with Kragnos in Gloomspite Gits, killing a reinforced unit of bow snakes. I got a whole heap of extra points being a prime hunter, as well as killing priority targets that were reinforced. So there was like an extra 5 victory points just from that one combat alone.
Yeah, no, those can add up really quickly.
Yeah, because then I killed Marathi the next turn with Scragrot, so it's even better.
Oh,
but
man.
what were the? I'm going to wrap this up, so I'll ask you a couple of closing questions, and I know it's getting late for you, and I obviously you've got a great list, and you've got some really good things in there, but also some interesting things. Like you don't see the Lord Arcanum very often. You've brought in the Aetherwings, which is great. I think the 2D Knight Heraldor. You could lean into so many different things, right? You're like, I want to get more run and charge stuff, or I want to get more movement shenanigans. Well, we talked about we talked about the Steadfast Advance. You could go 2D McToot, or I'm sure there are other ways to get.
No, the Heraldor.
I lose it.
I loved the Heraldor, and they took that away from him. They neutered the poor Heraldor. I was so sad about that. The Heraldor would be in this list if he still did that.
Yeah, that's right. He still toots on the terrain, but he's lost the
yeah. Which the terrain thing was really nice, but if I had to pick, I would have rather had the run and charge.
Oh yeah. Like poor old Sylvaneth, who are not doing very well in the meta. Like you don't have to worry too much about the terrain pieces. But something that I was always leaning into a lot with the with Hallowed Knights was I was really enjoying leaning into some of the other stuff. Like you've got Gardas, but also things like Praetors. I was actually surprised by being able to bodyguard with Praetors to be able to pass off wounds to the unit. They've got a potential, like a weird ward rule. So that combines quite well. There's lots of different ways you can lean into all this stuff. But going back to the question I was trying to ask you was, what were the keys to your successes at Adepticon?
I think I'll finally look at my notes here that I wrote up, just because I want to make sure that I give you a somewhat thoughtful answer here.
You just rolled more 6s is basically what you've written.
I will preface this by saying this was the most luck I've had at a GT. So luck definitely helps.
Which is true for everyone. Winning a tournament is skill, it's practice, and it's luck. Like anyone who wins a GT and says they didn't have luck on their side is lying through their teeth. Like the matchups. There's been plenty of times where it's like I played the right opponent just on the wrong battle plan, or the timing is just off. And there's just little things where there's been times where I've played the top faction 3 out of 5 games. There's been times where I've completely avoided them. So luck is absolutely a key important part.
Yeah, for sure. So I'd say, as far as some of my keys to victory, I think one of the things was I identified the key targets and the bad matchups really well and answered them. So, for instance, one of the things that I was really worried about. So I played IDK, and he had 2 units of the 2 sharks, right? And I was very concerned about those picking up the long strikes, right? Because that's exactly the sort of unit that, especially since now they basically just ignore my shooting on the first turn, right? And so what I really didn't want to see happen was those sharks come over and just pick up my long strikes. And so what I ended up doing was, I put them somewhere in the middle of the field. He dropped his sharks, and then I redeployed them all the way on the other flank. And I kind of just left the entire left flank of the battlefield void, except for, I think I had like Bastian and like a unit of Liberators and the Aetherwings. So nothing of importance. But that was the only thing that was on the left flank. And he also only had those sharks on the left flank. And so if he wanted to pull those over to the long strikes, not only was it going to take 2 turns, but he was going to have to leave that entire flank of the battlefield completely barren. And so that was kind of one of the things that I quickly recognized what the really bad matchup was going to be. And I came up with a strategy that I was hoping would solve it. And, it ended up working, because he ended up, rather than kind of completely pulling the sharks over to actually take out the target I didn't want them to, he kind of just, fed him into the left flank of the battlefield. And I think the scenario was the one where it's the old Star Strike one where the objectives can kind of come down randomly. And so, he didn't want to just completely abandon that side of the battlefield and then have the objectives land there. So that was one thing that I thought I did really well.
Can I just pause you on that one really quickly?
Sure.
For somebody who doesn't know how to read the field, right? Because you mentioned, it was important for you to prioritize certain targets and, make the right decisions. Do you have any advice on how somebody could get to that point?
I would say, I think what helps me the most is to put yourself in your opponent's shoes and look at your army and say, okay, if I was facing my own army, what would I want to take out first? What do I really, what's vulnerable? What are the key pieces that I really need to hold on to? So, obviously in this list, the long strikes are number one. I need to make sure that they're safe and that they're out of reach of everything. And so then that kind of presents itself with like, okay, well, I put myself in the opponent's shoes. They want to kill my long strikes. What do they have that could actually accomplish that? Something that has the range and the mobility. And then once you narrow that down, now you're like, okay, well, what can I do about that? Can I kill that unit? Can I neuter that unit? Can I distract it? What sort of things, another thing that I like to do, I didn't really get to do it much against this lineup just because of the matchups. But with the Castellan in there, I can stack all those armor buffs. And so one of the prime things I look for is, where is my opponent's mortal wounds coming from? If it's coming from 1 or 2 key pieces, 1 or 2 key units, well, now if I can take those off the battlefield, well, now my opponent's really going to struggle to kill anything. So that, I guess that's what I would say for people that are trying to analyze the pieces on the battlefield.
And I think that can be quite challenging, right? Because as a newer player or someone who's growing with their experience, it takes a while for you to know your own faction and then know your opponent's faction. Some of it can come up with questions you ask at the top. You could be like, hey, Matthew, can you tell me who does mortal wounds in your army? What's the range of those mortal wounds? And even if you don't know somebody's army, and we're not all encyclopedias, you can ask the questions at the start of the game that go, right, who does mortal wounds? What's the range? Are they spells? Are they abilities? Are they triggering on 6s on something? And I love the fact that you work backwards. You go, right, well, I need to protect my Lord Castellan in this because I need the +1. Who can reach out and touch the Lord Castellan? And you work backwards, so you then start identifying your targets, because each battle will be different. Each battle plan will be different. When there are 5 objectives on the table, the prioritization of liberators might be a little bit higher. Otherwise, you'll lose the objective game. But when you're fighting over 2 or 3, different story.
Right. Yeah, and I will say another thing. One thing I love about this community, and Adepticon, it was no different, is that I don't want to catch anybody off guard with some sneaky rule. That's not how I want to win, and vice versa. Most people seem to be of the same mindset, and so a lot of times, in Adepticon, it actually happened a lot because I played 2 Fire Slayers and a Deepkin. And those were books that I just hadn't had the time to really look at. And so I just asked my opponent straight up, I'm like, I'm not that familiar with your new book. Can you spend 5 minutes and run me through, all of the highlights? What are the key, what's your threat ranges? What are dangerous? Like, I don't even need you to tell me what the stat line is. Just say, this guy hits really hard at range. This guy's really scary in combat. This guy's really hard to kill. Like, that's enough information for me to kind of piece together what a battle plan is, and like for me, usually I don't have to do that with this list because everybody's so familiar with fulminators and long strikes, but I always take care to make sure that everybody knows exactly what Bastian does. I make sure that they know that he's going to redeploy, and he does the lightning thing, and he heals at the end of combat. And I always said that the Arcanum could teleport, because that's stuff that you really need to know. Can stuff run in charge? What's threat rangers are like? What does mortal wounds? So just these kind of, I think this like 10-minute powwow session at the beginning of the match where you kind of lay your cards on the table to a certain degree and say, this is what my army does, and this is what you can kind of expect. And so we're kind of starting from the same place, so to speak.
Yeah, I put together a video 12 months ago that I'd highly recommend anyone go check out, with some of the most common questions I ask at the tabletop. If you find yourself, just the 5 critical questions you're going to ask is, how many drops are you? What's your what's the longest shooting range you've got? Can you teleport? Can you summon? Find those 5 or 6 questions you ask every opponent. You'll make better decisions, because nobody is expected to know it's like over probably 1,000 war scrolls. There's like
there's
factions.
Too much. Yeah, there's too much stuff to know. All the different armies with all their different allegiances, and and a lot of times people will find some like weird little combination of like this artifact with this allegiance ability with this ally or something, and they have this combination that is can do some stuff that you're not ready for, and so it's hard to know everything.
Yeah, cool. Was there any armies that you didn't want to face, like you were hoping to avoid if possible?
I really didn't want to see the mirror match. I was actually more worried about the teleporting long strikes than I was the Stormdrake Guard. I actually thought I had a relatively good answer for Stormdrake Guard, or at least a battle plan. But those teleporting long strikes, I knew that was kind of the one thing that I really should have taken Scions to answer that, but I just didn't want to. And so I didn't want to see that. The cities of Sigmar with, 4 Stormdrake Guard and 4 fulminators coming from the sides and charging.
The living city list. Yeah,
the living city list. That, I think, that could have been really scary. I had some thoughts on that as well. And then the new books, I just didn't know what to expect. I saw a lot of Nurgle, and I was not very familiar with Nurgle, Fire Slayers, Deepkin. But thankfully my opponents were pretty, they were great sports, and they kind of walked me through, and they're like, this is what this does. This is what this does. I got to learn about how silly Fire Slayers, rallying on a 4-up can be. Those Volkite Berserkers are so hard to kill, and then he just, then you just retreat them and then rally almost back to full strength.
I'm a little bit worried that that Battlesmith doesn't get FAQ'd to be keyworded, because if you can ally in a Battlesmith and do rally on a 4-up and bring back Dracothian Guard on a 4-up, if that is not clarified at FAQ'd, that's going to be 150 odd points. I could see you dropping the Lord Castellan in seconds just to get that Battlesmith in, because like 4-up rally is just
crazy.
Incredible.
Yeah, that's just nuts. I would almost not take that just because it's so gross.
Oh, yeah, but it's just so good. Like it's essentially, if 3 go down, you're probably bringing back 2 on a command point.
Oh yeah, I mean that's probably the game, because those fulminators are so hard to kill. If they get it down to 1 guy and then it goes back to 3, that's just so much effort that your opponent put into killing those 3 fulminators that they, that's the game. I mean, honestly, 9 out of 10 times, if you rally, 2 fulminators back, that's hard to recover from.
2 more questions. Do you have any favorite cheeky combinations or unit synergies that maybe we didn't talk about in this particular list? Like, is there any other, even outside of your list, like in Stormcast? Because I think one other part that I want to talk to towards the end is what Jerome mentioned, which is, we are seeing a lot of common lists in Stormcast. You've got the Liberators, you've got the Dracothian Guard, you've got the Vindictors, you've got your Stormdrake Guard with the Knight Draconis. There's a lot of commonality in the tournament list. Yes, there's a couple of different structures, but there are common units across the board. And I'd be curious to find out if there are other units outside of what you've selected that maybe is worth considering or worth exploring. But yeah.
There's definitely a list that I'd like to run. I don't think it would be super competitive, but I think it would be kind of fun. And basically it would kind of leverage the Stormkeep, focus on the Redeemers, and I think you take like Vandus Hammerhand, because he actually can buff their attacks, and then you just max out a unit of like 15 Vindictors, and then you just make them super tanky. You probably take the Castellan to throw in the armor buffs, maybe take Life Swarm, maybe Indrasta, just to keep kind of really double down on making them really tanky. And so you kind of end up getting this kind of Soulblight Gravelord sort of feel, where you've got this, this tanky, somewhat killy unit of Vindictors that is just so hard to kill that you just can't punch through it. And I can't remember what Vandus does, but I think he gives him a pretty big
back. Go on. Sorry.
Does she only bring back Paladins?
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, I'm pretty sure she brings back.
I think it's based on the wound. I think it's based on the wound count. So I think she could bring back Vindictors. I don't know if I would put
three wounds or less. She can bring back slain models three wounds or less.
Yeah, so Vandus adds 1 to the attacks characteristic of Redeemers. So that was what I was thinking. So you add an extra attack for all of those Vindictors, and they get to attack. Like I said, I don't think it would be a super competitive list, but I was kind of intrigued because I really like making those Redeemer units shine.
I'm really surprised that I remember when the chariots were first shown on Warcom, people were salivating at the mouth, like they're mini Stonehorns. I'm going to run them in, and you rarely see them. I'm surprised that you're not seeing the Storm, because they have very good price. Like, for the price for what you get out of them.
Yeah, no,
very valuable.
Yeah, no, I think they're actually pretty good. I think I had some lists where I had about that number of points in, and I would definitely feel good slotting them in. I mean, for me, it was more of an aesthetic thing, just because I really like the Bretonnian, the Bretonnian theme, and the chariot didn't quite mesh with that. I'm sure I could make it work, but
yeah,
that was
what I've done on mine is as an Empire man. I don't know if you remember the Grand Theogonist Volkamar the Grim, and he's got that big eagle griffin at the back. I've extended the chassis on my chariot, and I've actually got that eagle, the big eagle statue over it. So I've got a little bit Empire on mine, but
nice.
There's so many good units. Like I really like Indrasa. Problem is, I just didn't find her do a lot in combat. I was really unimpressed with her stats in combat. Primetime was another one. A lot of people were talking about how good Primetime was because he got the 4-up ward.
Yeah, he's a lot jankier now.
I think the problem is that Bastian has taken on those points, where before Bastian, yeah, you would chuck down prime time for 300 points. But now you're taking either Bastian if you're running hammers, or you're taking Gardas, who's a steal at 150 points.
Oh, yeah, Gardas is
so cheap.
Yeah, Gardas is crazy good. No, I think the Celston, I like the Celston Prime. I think the big advantage of him over Bastian is just that speed, because he can, he can drop down anywhere on the field and guarantee a charge. I still think Bastian gives you way much more, a lot more, just from a utility standpoint. I think it's no contest between him, and Yndrasta and the Celston Prime. I think Bastian just brings so much to the table.
And you know what? Like an Obsidian Crane here, making an interesting comment, or alluding to at least an interesting comment. If we find that things like Dracothian Guard and the Fulminators are giving away too many points, and you still need that combat monster that can go in and do damage, I think something like the Chariot can work quite well if you are. I mean, it doesn't have the wounds, it's not the durability, but boy, oh boy, can they do some damage.
Yeah, no,
on the charge.
The chariots are not bad.
Yeah, I think this is a lot of. I think this is the blessing and the curse of Stormcast, is that you have so many options that it's hard to nail down a list. What's awesome is as the meta shifts and evolves over time, you've got something in your pocket that you can pull out and tweak and modify. Like that you've got the Banner Apotheosis person. You've got this whole Sacrosanct that no one's tapping into. Another sneaky one that I know that the boys on the Stormkeep podcast really love, is it the Knight Judicator? Is it that the big bow hero guy?
Yeah.
That's not too bad as well. And it's obviously not going to give away your priority target stuff, or it could be that final blow to take down a priority target when the long strikes do most of the damage.
Yeah, no, he's really good too. Yeah, no, Stormcast has a ridiculous bench. Over the years, they have just stacked up this ridiculous list of units, and even when like some chunks of it kind of slowly go out of favor, other pieces roll in, and now they're really good, and so it's a fun army to run and see all the different variations and tweaks and all that sort of stuff. I mean, because I haven't seen anybody else take Griff Charger, and I've been really surprised how nobody's taking the Castellan, so it's like I feel like all of the heroes that I took aren't really being utilized that much.
No, because in this type of list, for example, and I'll just bring it back up for anyone who might join late, like this type of list, most people would auto default the Lord Relictor as opposed to the Lord Castellan. Like the Relictor would go into this list immediately. But when you start looking at the combinations and start looking at, okay, getting the +1, a bit more reliable save, give it a spell, and you got some good utility out of it. It's not a bad shout. I think that's the problem, is there's too many good options, not enough points. Let's play 3,000 point games, folks. No, I don't have time. Anything you want to wrap up with? Any shout outs you want to make? This has been awesome, by the way, and a big congratulations for going 5-0, winning Adepticon, one of the, I guess, the major events in America. I was going to call you Melbourne for some reason. America, very different place. Any shout outs? Anyone you want to say hello to, or anything that you want to close us off with?
Yeah, sure. I'll just shout out to David Griffin. He's the guy that runs NashCon. NashCon is just amazing. No offense to Adepticon, but the tables at NashCon are just phenomenal. David goes above and beyond to make sure that each table has tons of really unique, great, like themed terrain. I mean, you're talking about like 100-man event where every single table you're looking at like, wow, I want to play on that table. I want to play on that table. I want to play on that table. It's great. He's awesome. He runs a great event. And I think it just opened up. I don't know if it might already be booked up maybe, but it usually fills up pretty quick. But it's definitely worth the trip. So
August is usually like August, September time across
the
year.
It's usually, I think it's usually August. It's usually after the new GHB drops. So it's a great opportunity to kind of test the waters with the new new rules and everything. And yeah, it's just a blast.
And big shout out to obviously Crazy Horse, who is that enabler of terrain for David.
Yep.
It's just absolutely insane, that terrain, man. Mathew, this has been awesome. I think we could talk a long time, and you've obviously given a lot of value to us. And I think for any of the Stormcast people, my advice to you, and I'd be curious in the comment section, how are you thinking about your list now that, the hunters out there? Are you, I still think Judicators have a play, maybe not in your list, but I still think that, long strikes are slowly starting to, will there be a points increase in GHB 2022?
Oh, yeah. I almost guarantee it.
Yeah, you feel it's coming, right? The hunt is testing the waters to see, does it change the dominance? And right now it hasn't. Like 99.9% of people who are playing long strikes will continue to play long strikes, because even giving away the extra VP, you're getting more value than what you're giving away. So will there be a points increase? Will it go to the crossbows? Will we actually go into more of will they be incentivized somehow, especially if we do go into a horde meta? And I think that's partially why I wanted to play with my Gits, is I don't care about your long strike model builds. I've still got 100 idiots on the table, and you don't have the damage output. So who knows? Who sees where the game goes and what the incentives are going to be in GHB 2022? And who knows what's going to be happening with these incarnates? The long strikes probably definitely are going to be valuable to pull down the bonded heroes if people are running the Crom Spine more often. But Mathew, it's been awesome. I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to have lunch. You go to bed. You go do your thing. Thank you for everyone who listened live. Appreciate it. And hopefully I see you. I don't know. I want to go to America soon. Let me come in.
Definitely. No, I look forward to it. And thanks for inviting me on. Hopefully everybody found it at least entertaining or interesting.
They took away a lot of value, and they're going to leave it in the comment section. They're going to say Matthew's wonderful. Thank you so much. He's lovely. Greatest instant sliced bread. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Right. Thanks.
Bye. Thanks for sticking around until the end. I hope you found that video interesting and you walked away with a few new ideas. If you did, I would appreciate it if you hit like on the video, as well as left me a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. The conversation will continue over on Discord, so link is down below in the episode description if you want to join the Discord and continue the Age of Sigmar conversation. I want to give a massive shout out as well to these absolute bloody legends, these champions who have continued to support me through Patreon or YouTube members. That is going directly into supporting the maintenance and the growth of this channel. So thank you very much, guys. Much appreciated. And until next time, roll more sixes.